Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're joining us from. I'm Etienne Turpin. I'll be your moderator for the next few hours for the international launch event of Ursula Biemann's new publication platform, Becoming Earth. To start things off, I'll immediately pass the mic to the curator and director of the Art Museum of the National University of Colombia in Bogota, Maria Belén Saez de Ibarra, who will give her opening remarks.
Gracias, Etienne. Es realmente un momento.
Thank you, Etienne. It's truly kind of a culmination of many years of work for Ursula, and we feel very honored that she has accepted that it will be us who publish this monograph, which is so careful and which comes from a material relation and experience radicated in experience with communities around the world, and her huge capacity to study and absorb and include in her own subjective nature as an artist some concepts of ethics and thought that we urgently need to carry out the resistance today to generate a transformation of our planet, as she has recognized for a long time already. So first, we'd like to congratulate Ursula. It's unfortunate that we can't be here in person, but I'd really like to personally thank you for your dedication and all of your work and this empathy that you have with all of these processes and places where this transformation and resistance of life is taking place, and with these subjects and entities and ways of being that have been excluded from our normal thought or our normal conception of the earth, or what is a human, and those who have been invisibilized with their narratives, and specifically focusing on those who are absent. And so, for example, this dedication that you've had over the last 3 years, specifically here in Colombia and in Putumayo, Nariño, and in Cauca, with the indigenous communities of Colombia, in addition to everything you did in the Ecuadorian jungles with this project that you carried out there, where you identified the forest as one of the vast entities that thinks, that has desires, that has communication methods, but are essential actors to safeguard an ethics and an affirmation of life. This is an ethics that affirms life, that calls for, a biological centric based on a cosmology that identifies the territories as an intersectionality of different forces, where thought is a way where you can interact with the environment, where the spirit is a framework for the essence of everything that is present, and as we understand as the planet and our earth. And this also generates possibilities to connect with what is not visible. And so, this aesthetic works that you have and how you contribute to thought, and allows our cultural institutions to acknowledge and maybe highlight in the production of knowledge in this very confusing moments where science itself and the theoreticians are maybe kind of independent or not connected. And so your individual person, your personality, it shows that there's this interconnection, this intersectionality where the smallest actors are part of a very important chain and is part of a living force, where the sacred spirit where the sculptures shows that the human is not exceptional, but maybe just a small fraction of this larger constellation, of this planetary constellation of an eco-vision, or this thoughts of affirmative life. You contribute so many things that we need, and you provide ethics in a moment where resistance can be confused with violence, where at the same time the resistance is against life, but if we don't have clarity, or if we don't have clear concepts, if we don't have clear ideas about where we are going and what we are affirming, and from where, from which place, and more importantly, in association with whom, you talks about having this association with life, that thinking about life from life. And that's why your presence in the Amazon with the Inga communities and the communities that are connected with us today, that's why it is, we need this clarity that you have provided. Today in Colombia, we are a country that's burning. The people have been on the streets for the last 7 days. And everything seems to be very chaotic. The jungle is also burning. The Amazon jungles are burning, not only in Colombia, but also in Brazil and the 11 countries that make up the Amazon. And there's different kinds of and levels of violence. But we always see this idea that life is something that's to be consumed, it's something mechanical, it's something that's to be used. But your project as a cognitive entity that has different spaces to operate in relation with time, that teaches us that development is this man moving forward to its improvement, to have a better quality of life or the access to social rights. It's a trick. And there's a part of the world where that doesn't operate in that way. And so maybe this concept of what is advancing or how we see advancement, we need to change how we understand that, and we need to connect it with this profound time, this long time, where this idea, what seems to be, which seems to come out of historic process of our common sense as a society. We see that there's maybe atrophy, and so we need to maybe go back to prior conceptions that might challenge current concepts, and where we see these constellations where there's this flowing and this interconnection. In my professional life, I've worked with very few artists that have this human quality and this conceptual quality, and they are essential to have actions from the institutions and the artists, and for the people, and for sciences, and for those people who are knowledge creators. So how do we can create a new ethics of resistance that's something that affirms life in this spirit of how culture, this is a horizon of life where we are united, even if it's something that's very small, where we can achieve this transformation, or you can join this transformation that's already taken place and has shown that life can be re-identified and recodified and survive. What hasn't been shown is that humans can survive as a culture, and that's why it's important to recognize that humans are not superior or exceptional or outside, but instead a modest part that can listen, that can learn, that can think from life, from those who have been silenced, from these communities who know about resistance, and after centuries of oppression, they have carried out this resistance. And in these jungles, in the intertropical region, these are the last major jungle that seems to resist, but is in danger. The Amazon jungle is in danger of extinction. So these places, maybe we have the formula for the survival, but at the same time, it's the epicenter of the catastrophe. And that's why your work is so important, because it doesn't ignore the dangers. It doesn't ignore the tragedy, which is of being in the center of where there's a materialization of life as an element that produces money as a raw material. I think maybe a curse we have in our country is that we have been colonized and we don't have governability, and we are hard hit by the violence, but at the same time, we live among very powerful cosmovisions, which is the jungle itself, and communities that have known how to resist. And that is the main reason why Ursula has opened such an important path forward as an institution in the National University. And so that's why we are so proud. And at the same time, it gives us hope to be able to be in contact with other artists and communities and scientists to be a part of this cosmovision, so we can create these assemblages with the communities, with the artists, to be able to listen to the forest, to the jungle, and to learn from it. How can we carry out a project where we can stop being those who know, those who can, to be humbly recognize the immense capacity of life and to think with it and about it. So thank you so much, Ursula. Thank you for your dedication, your life dedication. We have projects where for years she has been able to be in contact with these micro-resistance systems through the communities, through the forests, with their spiritual beliefs, with their cultures, all in the concept of unity, and to see how we can have a world where our focus changes radically, but specifically our ethics and the human culture in this storyline. So I think we see that this is based on experiences that have major impacts without and while showing humility and showing this huge capacity that art, and as an artist you have to show a new sensitivity, awareness, to expand our perception and to be able to imagine new ways of being with nature, to resist and co-resist with nature in a world that is so dangerously, and the vanity of man, that things with bioengineering and actions of science that serves capital and development, that we can overcome the crisis. And so I think this is a radical mistake. And however, people like Ursula and the leaders she reflects in her work are individuals who are working in Colombia, such as the Inga community, Hernando Chindoy. They show that it's possible to have a change in the direction of history, it's possible to change how we see these conceptions, but it's almost also impossible. So there's such a strange way of being and not being foreseeing the moment, but not making that final decision. This path that continues to be open. Thank you to individuals, artists such as Ursula Biemann, such as the leaders and the protagonists that she has reflected over her years of work, and we know she will continue to do so. So I'd like to thank everyone who's here, who has accompanied us. These are important philosophers and these thinkers in this important change, and they are all a part of the actions that are based in empathy and such reflected in Ursula's human qualities. The people who have been called to be here and the other academics who are with us today are people who are very empathetic, who are very loving, and the people who can maintain this path forward, and the transformation will not be chaotic if we follow this path.
Great, thank you, Beilin. It was a beautiful introduction. And for any of you listening who preferred hearing Beilin's introduction to my follow-up, you can switch in the channel on the website to Spanish to hear everything that will follow in Spanish. If you prefer hearing me in English, you can switch to the English channel. And hopefully everyone joining us is in the right language connection. I'll also mention just underneath us on the webpage, if you have questions, we're already receiving dozens of questions from Beilin's introduction. So we'll do the best that we can to group those and bring them into the discussion as we move forward, but please do feel free to share them under the video. And for the many people who have already asked us if this event is recorded, it indeed will be, and you will be able to see it in its totality, as well as all of the philosophical reflections and contributions in their, each to their own part, on the same page that you're now viewing the video. But with those pragmatics aside, I pass the mic over to Ursula, who will give us a brief introduction from her side in the jungle.
Well, thanks. Thank you all very much. I just want to share my excitement for you being all here tonight. Many of you have been really important people as friends and contributors. In fact, I see a lot of my work as forms of collaborations with other artists, with thinkers, with curators, and so this is always a great moment to actually share the result with all of you here. And I know there are a lot of people attending, so hello to all of you out there as well. It is really quite difficult after Beilin's introduction to say anything more about my work. It's very difficult to look back on 10 years of work and have anything coherent to say. But I would say that simply Becoming Earth is in fact a retrospective. And after many years of working on migration and the new borders and transnational spaces that were emerging in the wake of globalization, that is this new body of work that I'm presenting today is looking at a completely different set of problems which result precisely from this globalization of the industrialization and extraction that was going on. And the results were, of course, biodiversity loss, climate change, and general eco crisis, but also really, the increasing pressure on the tropical forests and the people who inhabit them. And so I decided about 10 years ago to use the artistic practice that I had developed in these previous years to start tackling these new important and very urgent eco-political questions. And so I would also say that most of the time I start a new work from being inspired from reading philosophy and other theories, and that is the reason also we wanted to invite some of them and share this moment. And so when a thought captivates me, my imagination, I begin to think about where in the world could I locate this problematic and connect it to some micropolitics on the ground in that specific geography. So it's always a combination of theoretical and empirical knowledge that makes meaning of my video works. I would also say that they are extremely verbal. There are people being interviewed, there is voiceover, there is text on screen, there is an overarching narrative that brings in usually a planetary and theoretical reading. And for the last few years, I have also started to include vocalizations of non-human beings, such as whale songs and insects, winds and birds and so on. So the forest and the sea are alive and they have their say in my videos. Increasingly, these other beings have moved to the foreground. They start being lively actors in my research, from microbial to the planetary scales of the ocean streams. There is a constant interweaving of text and video in every form of presentation I do, even in my performance lectures, where I include video clips, for instance, and I do a live voiceover. I consider these video lectures also a form of artistic work in and of itself. And I think that with Maria Biemann, we found a very similar format for presenting this series of ecological videos online in this Becoming Earth. And I'm very happy that we found this format, which corresponds really a lot closer to my essayistic form of working, which is always a form of writing that is more than textual, you know. So I also enjoy making, I enjoy the idea of making all of this publicly available. I know that that this will be appreciated by students and researchers and academics who have used my work in classes of art and ecology around the world. I'm particularly happy to locate this online monograph here at the UNAL Art Museum in Colombia, because it's a veritable hotspot of biodiversity and natural wealth, but sadly also a place of rampant deforestation and large-scale extractionist projects. Significantly for my work, Colombia is also a place where Western natural science kind of simultaneously emerged with the colonial project and conquest. And I think these two elements have really shaped very strongly our relationship to in modern thinking, in the way we relate to the natural world, which is in fact has always been not just a natural but a biocultural world. I continue to work in Colombia together with Maria Biemann on various new projects, and that's another reason why I think it's great that we can launch this monograph here. So I want to thank you personally, Maria Biemann, for giving me this chance and for your tremendous generosity that has flown into these projects and your ideas that went into them. I also want to thank Etienne for doing such a great job on editing this volume, and it's so much more for making this event happen tonight, and for Mariana Hoyos, who is also with us, who did this beautiful graphic design and magically made it work on the UNAL server. So thank you all very much, and I'm sending it back to Etienne now. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ursula. And I believe we have all of our guests who will be joining us live now. Magically, everyone has made it into the bubble. So just to give a brief overview for people just joining us, what we wanted to do was invite some of the most important thinkers that Ursula has been in conversation with, thinking with, writing with over the years. In relation to becoming Earth. Some of them could join us. Some of them sent videos because they could not join us. Some folks wanted to join us and had things arise. Some people made it that we did not expect. So it's in fact like a real, has a feeling of reality in that way. But what we're going to do is play 4 clips that we have mixed from the various voices and interlocutors. Thank you to Ginny Davies and Megan Rica, as well as Mariana Hoyos, for working on all of these clips. And we will play a clip and return to our group here live to have a conversation, and that will take us through the rest of the program. I won't introduce any of the individuals who are joining us here by title, because they all exceed any one designation of writer or artist or professor or curator or activist. But we will have with us for the remainder Emmanuel Aloha, Rosie Bradotti, Kojo Eshun, and Helen Guenin. And we will be joined by a number of other video haunts that will come along. So to start things off, we would like to ask Dirección if you could kindly begin to roll clip 2, and I introduce for you the video personality of Professor Rosie Bradotti. Thank you all for joining us.
Dear Ursula, dear friends, it is a great pleasure to be part of this online symposium to celebrate and mark this very important event of the launching of the Becoming Earth website that gathers a lifetime, really, dear Ursula, of creativity, of commitment, of militancy, and of intellectual passions. Great honor to be here, and first of all, congratulations from the bottom of my heart. Well done, timely. We need points of gathering, planes of compositions of virtual communities, and we need to have all of your work very focused and very grounded, because it is very important, very inspirational, and everlasting, we hope. Ursula and I go way back. I can't even remember when it was, dear Ursula, in the days when feminism was still Hamas movement, and we were working together on what became the Performing the Border, one of your very first major interventions on sexual violence on women, on migrations, trafficking, as it is known, on the Mexican-US border. Pioneering work, difficult work, confrontational, and you came to Utrecht, we worked and studied together, and it was your commitment to the materiality of what I would call patterns of oppression. There was our first points of encounter, real bodies in real labor relations, in real territories, in harsh power relations, struggling. And yet out of it, the poetics of your work always extracts an ethical message, an aesthetic message, of endurance, of resilience, of beauty, of affirmation. It's never in any way self-indulgent. It's sharp, it's analytic, it's empowering in this respect. And for a while back in the 90s, it feels like a long, long time ago, we worked together. I feel like our intellectual itinerary almost runs parallel on issues of desire, of embodiment, of gender, feminist differences, and how the harsh power relations of neoliberalism, of the global economy, of technologically mediated neoliberal economics, how all of that shapes something that we could call the status of women, LGBT people, and gender in general. Always the broader perspective, always keeping the broader look. I think that that's one of the strengths of your work, and it's what runs through it. And for me, it's a point of constant interrogation and dialogue. With the technology through remote sensing and Europlex, and we're looking at the turn of the centuries, your kind of spatial geographical sensibility marries into the technology, and with the technology into the geopolitics of surveillance and of the struggle for fuel and raw energy, the extractive economies, with the pipelines and the never-ending territorial disputes. The questions of borders and the borders of Europe, Europe as a kind of a fortress that fails to actually address its broader missions as a place of hospitality, as a place of humane encounter. The whole period where through Europlex and contained mobility, you go into issues of migrations, of bodies trying to get across those borders, and bodies that are disposable, the digital proletariat, the asylum seekers, men, women, children that nobody particularly cares for and that Europe lets down. The sharp edge, but again from the spatial angle through the technology, almost a planetary span, something that really encompasses very much on a spatial, terrestrial outlook. Very important interventions in the periods when just after 9/11, borders shut down, walls go up everywhere, and the question of sustainability as a social issue really becomes even more central to your work. Amazing pioneering work on the technology, very inspirational for me, from the geography to the extraterritorial and almost planetary and extraplanetary level of intervention, pioneering, brave, and always compassionate, but never sentimental, always with a sharp edge of analytical strength. And then from there, from contained mobility, Black Sea files, we already go from human social sustainability to the environmental issue. The ecologies that structure our existence are social, environmental, affective, and psychic. Here, Guattari really gives us an everlasting lessons. You can't just work on the earth and becoming earth. The earth is a territorial, it's a spatial entity. The earth is a cosmic entity. And in the latest work on forest law, on the new work on the becomings of our ecologically challenged planet, what resonates for me in your work, Ursula, is the indigenous perspective as well, which I have from my Australian side, having grown up a proud Melbourneian, the lessons of indigenous cosmologies and philosophy, that the land is the law, the land is the nurturing force, the land is our ethical compass, and we need to learn from those cosmologies with humility and an awareness of the damages that colonialism has inflicted to world systems that we dismissed far too hastily as animistic, whereas in fact they are longue durée perspectives on how to become Earth in the respect of our mutual interdependence with human and non-humans. So again, it's a sort of a coming together of so many trends, so many aspects of your work that resonate with mine. The becoming Earth is a becoming other than human, a becoming imperceptible. It is a modest witnessing, as Donna Haraway would say. It's a becoming other, as I would say, in an affirmative ethical mode. This is our point of encounter, dear Ursula, sharp analysis, compassionate heart, and an affirmative outlook, because there is a lot to be done, no time to waste, and we can do this together. Again, congratulations on this milestone achievement, proud to be part of it, and looking forward to many more years of dialogue and communal struggle. Thank you all, and lots of love.
Great. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you to Professor Berdotti for this beautiful introduction. And she is with us, so welcome. I would like to maybe start out, if I may, with a question to Ursula, actually, to start, because the first time that I encountered your work, which you may not know, despite our many conversations, I saw Black Sea Files presented in a philosophy conference sometime when I was a young philosophy student in the early 2000s. And I was so amazed. I still have such a strong memory of this, because of this feeling of you can do that, that this was a kind of completely new window into the production of this material storytelling. And I would just ask Ursula, maybe if you could just say a few more words about the movement in that previous body of work into Becoming Earth, as maybe a movement from a geographical concern into a geological one. And I'm sure many of our guests would love to also pick up on this thread of what we might call a geological turn that accompanies many of the works in Becoming Earth.
Well, it's interesting that you would pick out Black Sea Files, because it's a bit the odd one out at that moment, because I was mostly working on migration and bodies and mobility and such things. And with Black Sea Files, I started to become a lot more interested in the movement of resources, or let's say in the simultaneous movements and the interconnection of these movements between human migration and the flow of resources and capital. And that's what really was the beginning of this idea of going to the Caucasus and following the pipeline that was just in the process of being built between the Caspian Sea and the Mediterranean. And that was just kind of the opening up, the expansion of Europe into these new former socialist territories. And it was just amazing to see the amount of transformation, of social transformation, that such a big infrastructure would bring into a region. And that's what I try to document through a lot of different smaller clips that I organized into a series of files, which are a bit like secret intelligence files, which really underscores a bit my way of using investigative video as a form of artistic practice in the field. So I had no clue what I was doing, frankly. I just knew I wanted to document as much as I could, and had to start looking much more into these materialities of the earth and how it transformed. Obviously, geology, when you deal with oil extraction and this whole oil-soaked territory in the Caucasus, just becomes really, moves to the fore, this whole geology issue. But really more so even later in deep weather, which we have screened before the conference, where geology is also opening up a completely different time scale into deep time, right? And I think that move, that explosion into a different time scale, is really what I started to to grasp slowly. You know, it took a long time to really sink in what that means, because we have always focused on the last 50 years of history since World War II, that we were just completely locked on this time scale. And then suddenly this big blow opened with starting to gaze into deep time. And I think that that really is what opened up this planetary discussion. Is that
great? Thank you. That's great. I mean, I think what becomes quite interesting as the scales start to increase and diversify. Michael Rothberg has this book on multidirectional memory, excuse me. And what I've been thinking about both with these films, but also with Kojo through the Autolith Group films, this question of multidimensional memory, not just that it's in different directions, but it's in different dimensions and unfolding in completely arrhythmic temporalities that are variously providing different affordances, different forms of violence. And I think that the way in which we come to the ability to sustain thinking those multi-dimensional elements it takes an incredible amount of work. Obviously, as you say, this didn't just appear in the work immediately. I'm wondering, Kojo or Professor Berdotti or anyone else want to comment on this element, because the geological is not simply one among other temporalities. It is in a way a kind of fragmenting temporality.
I agree. I think part of what Ursula's project entails, and it's something that many people are working on, but Ursula has approached it in a specific way, is to open up a dimension of the interscalar, to move across scales and to move carefully so that different claims can be made as those scales and as those levels are formulated. I think we don't talk enough about Ursula as a post-cinematic artist, as a thinker who thinks with those combinations of images, sounds, noises, voices, and silences, because to compose the movement across those scales requires these post-cinematic figures, these figurations that Ursula works with, you know, and they attain a particular force. The indigenous scientist, you know, that would be one figure of thought, or one special traveling shot that I like very much, where the camera is in a boat, low in a boat, like in Forest Law, where the camera is sitting low in the boat and just traveling northwards down the river. You know, these kinds of traveling perspectives that Ursula, I think, is very, very specific at working out. Okay, I could go on and on about the specific figures that Ursula has invented in order to evoke what Gabrielle Hett calls an interscalar vehicle, in order to mobilize video as an interscalar vehicle. But I'll stop, otherwise I'll just go on and on and on. I'll stop there for the moment.
But with interscalar, you mean kind of between planetary and very specific local settings, but that includes some kind of more the kind of image making that is more suggestive and works on a subconscious level almost, rather than I mean both. I mean, you know, when you talk about the interoceanic, like, how do you show that? Or one thing I like very much is when you have a shot that's
that is paused, or it's static, but it's not static. It's trembling and it's full of continuous activity, but the shot itself makes you slow down, or the way you move between a voice and a text. Like, when is it a text and when is it a voice? And that move, often the text is the moment that's carrying a certain figure of thought, which you've compressed. So I think you're doing it all the time. And what is fascinating is the sensitization that your methods invite us to become habituated to. It's as if your videos are like inviting us to be sensitized to those scalar movements, and both interscalar and intrascalar.
Yeah, I think this question that is a question that Yvonne Vocart has also brought up with a reading of some of these works, of the essentially as a curation of sensibility within the viewer to discover different capacities for relaying both time, sense, but not experience in a way that we would necessarily use phenomenologically, but as a kind of new sense, video as an interscalar vehicle, but video also as a new sense organ, potentially. Would anyone else like to get in on the video without organs before we relay into another clip segment? I don't want to cut anyone off. So I will just mention one thing before we roll into the next clip, is that again, everyone joining us and everyone who has shared a clip for this presentation has such extraordinary biographies that I'm not going to read them all because we would have no other activity in the evening. But you can read them beneath the video in the website. And I will simply say that the next clip is Dirección prepares clip 3. We will hear from Hélène Guénin from the museum in Nice, and Emmanuel Aloha, the chair of philosophy and aesthetics. And we will return to hear from them in their live personas. But at the moment, I pass you to clip 3. Thank you all for staying with us.
Hello, I'm Hélène Guénin. I'm a director at MAMAC, the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Nice, France. Since a few years, I had the opportunity to show the work of Ursula Biemann in different exhibition contexts, and especially in 2020, we prepared together a solo show focused on her videos dealing with ecological issues. Since 10 years, I have developed in my curatorial approach regular attention on artists dealing with ecological challenges since the late 1950s to today. And among all the artists I had the great opportunity to work with, Ursula Biemann appears to me as a very strong, singular, ethical figure who is able to deal with a huge complexity of a subject without any dogmatic approach. And one of the first aspects that I would like to raise about Ursula Biemann is what I consider as an ethical position of the artist and an act of resistance that consists in giving voice to alternative ways of living in the world. This is a change of perspective, and I consider this as a counterpoint to the Anthropocene discourse that has locked us in a state of astonishment and darkness since the turn of the millennium. This concept of the Anthropocene helped us, of course, and was very important to help us to get out of the narrow perspective of our lifetime frame and to think on global and planetary timescales. But as a paradox, it also generated a feeling of powerlessness. We experiment every day the fact that we are spectators and actors of a huge devastation, and it would be easy in this context to give into pessimism, to feel powerless, and just to disengage ourselves from any attempt to change things. And it is definitely necessary, of course, to make critical assessments of the state of the world, but it is not enough. And from my point of view, what is important in the approach of Ursula Biemann is that she invites us to reconnect to our roots in the natural order, instead of giving into today's climate of darkness and catastrophism. She also invites us to listen to people who live in a rich and respectful relationship with their territory and with the non-human, as for example in forest law, in which she gives voice to indigenous leaders, scientists, jurists who have sued oil and mining companies in order to get recognition of a serious attack that were occurring on biodiversity and to obtain reparation and soil remediation. In each video, she opens up alternative visions and visions of the future. For example, the richness of the cosmovision of indigenous people, the necessity to consider the equal dignity of all forms of life, the question of care, of reparation, interspecies communications, and many other aspects that basically put life at the forefront and at the center of every consideration. There is an expression that I love and that in one way sums up this position. It's from the science fiction author Ursula Le Guin, who in one of her novels opposed the killer story to a urge for a life story. And for me, it is precisely what Ursula Biemann is doing through her video essays, as she gives voice to people who embody this life story and an attitude of care in their daily life, as we can find in forest law, but also people who show their ability to reinvent themselves in the most dramatic context, as in deep weather, that shows people in Bangladesh building dams with their hands against the rise of the sea level. Those people are basically struggling for survival in new climate conditions, but they show their ability to adapt themselves and to struggle for life. This is also what Ursula Biemann is doing now with this wonderful project, collective project of imagining and creating an indigenous university. This is a major shift in perception and in one way an act of empowerment. It is, in my point of view, highly political, and I became aware of this necessity of a change in our perspectives after a long time research I initiated in 2011, confronting the topic of the sublime, which is traditional in Western art history, to this concept of the Anthropocene. This led to an exhibition project in which I decided in the end to give an important visibility to artists who were promoting ecofeminist approaches, healing actions and alternative visions of the future and of our relation to nature, and not only to people who were proposing assessments about the current state of the living world. The second aspect that I would like to briefly raise is the use of fiction that is more and more present in the work of Ursula Biemann, as she progressively shifted from a documentary approach to a fictional approach. So this is of course an artistic decision, but it is also for me a real tool in terms of transmission and way of sharing visions. The Belgian philosopher and scientist Isabelle Stengers has long defended the importance of narrative, of the stimulation of the imagination to share scientific knowledge with the largest audience. Stengers also promotes the importance of science fiction to envisage new perspectives and new possibilities, especially when we are blocked and stuck in our current and traditional perceptions and models. This is what Ursula Biemann is doing when she chooses the territory of imagination to show and convey the diversity of current scientific and anthropological debates and researches to a large audience, who is often not aware of the ecological debates of our time. She injects scientific contents that are suggested by poetic and visual means, but she also uses the voice of she narrators or she scientists, as in Subatlantic or as in Acoustic Ocean. In this work especially, she uses a she narrator, a Sami scientist, that is trying to capture the sounds emitted by marine creatures and to communicate with them, introducing the idea of a continuity of relationships between all forms of life. It is a way of suggesting that the scenarios of our future will only be possible if they are envisaged collectively and in an interspecies alliance between human and non-human. This call for a shift from an anthropocentric perception to bio-centric apprehension of the world is long-rooted in some families of ecological and anthropological thinkers, but also in indigenous cosmovisions. To get back to Biemann's use of fiction, it's a position that seems fundamental to me as a political and poetical statement. It is a fantastic tool addressing our emotional intelligence and fostering a process of awareness. And this is precisely what we need today to build up other visions and other futures. Thank you.
Hola a todas y todos. Empezaré con un relato hecho por Maurice Lenart, un misionero y etnólogo que pasó las primeras décadas del siglo XX en Nueva Caledonia con el pueblo kanak. Lenart, que estableció el primer diccionario de la lengua wailú y la formalizó en gramática, mientras que trató de iniciar los kanakes a las enseñanzas de los evangelios, un día se reúne con uno de los ancianos kanak que se llamaba Buesu Eji para hacer balance de todos sus trabajos de más de 30 años. Y el anciano le pregunta cuáles son los progresos realizados. Y al ver que esto todavía está reflexionando, se arriesga a hacer una sugerencia. En resumen, dime, ¿es la noción de espíritu la que hemos introducido en vuestro pensamiento, verdad? Y el anciano lo mira con estupor. ¿El espíritu? Bueno, no nos has traído el espíritu. Ya sabíamos lo del espíritu. Ya procedíamos según el espíritu. Lo que nos trajiste fue el cuerpo. Creo que esta anécdota es muy llamativo. Leonard lo interpretó la cosmovisión de los kanak como una cosmovisión indiferenciada donde la roca, la planta, el cuerpo humano, todos proceden de estructuras análogas, idénticas, una identidad de sustancia que funde en el mismo flujo de vida todos estos seres. Pero también podemos dar otra interpretación a la anécdota contado. Los recortes ontológicos y las separaciones entre seres no necesariamente corresponden a una ontología que con Philippe Descola podríamos llamar una ontología naturalista que separa por ejemplo, las materias y los espíritus. Más bien, vemos que los melanesianos organizan de otra manera las reticulaciones de los seres. La palabra que significa piel, por ejemplo, también significa corteza del árbol. la de la carne, lo de los músculos, el núcleo de la fruta, la de los huesos, que se refiere al corazón de coral, mientras que los intestinos, por ejemplo, se nombran con la misma palabra que la palabra para la liana de la selva. Así que vemos que todas estas divisiones expresan divisiones, las divisiones de las palabras indican divisiones del ser, y cambiar de lengua es también una manera de cambiar la manera de organizar el mobiliario del mundo, de ver otras coaliciones entre las cosas y los seres que lo pueblan. Y sobre todo, creo que este cambio implica una traducción, una transposición, un desplazamiento de perspectivas. Cada obra de Ursula Biemann implica un tal cambio de perspectiva y nos hace escuchar, por ejemplo, como criaturas submarinas del Ártico en Acoustic Ocean, a pensar como un río en su obra sobre el Nilo en Egipto, entender las correlaciones entre elementos fluidos como aceite y agua en Deep Weather, o abrir nuestros sentidos para percibir las microinteracciones de la selva de Borneo. Y todo eso me deja pensar que son hoy artistas como Ursula que nos ayudan a entender lo que puede significar un multinaturalismo militante. En vez de defender frente a unas culturas aceptadas como diversas una naturaleza única y homogénea, se trata de entender la multiplicidad de naturalezas que interactúan entre sí, una socionaturaleza, por así decir. Considerando la anécdota de Maurice Lénard, es tan peligroso el pensamiento de la unidad del cuerpo que lo del pensamiento de un cualquiera monopolio humano sobre lo que sería la mente. La iniciativa de Úrsula y sus colegas para establecer una universidad indígena en Amazonia me parece asombrosa a este respecto, porque implica repensar las conexiones entre las vindicaciones al acceso general al conocimiento, la base de toda universidad, y la crítica de un universalismo olvidadizo de sus efectos mortíferos. Quizás ser un sujeto nunca fue otra cosa que tener la capacidad de formar un punto de vista. Entonces, si así es, son los saberes locales enraizados en una situación, en una realidad concreta que nos permiten retomar conciencia de nuestra ubicación respectiva en este planeta. Cuando te llevan a cazar el anaconda y que sostienen que tienes que aprender a percibir como un reptil, eso fue la oportunidad que tuve hace años en Amazonia, o cuando te dicen de observar los delfines de agua dulce para entender cómo evitar a los caimanes allí en la selva boliviana, o que un chamán explica las psicotécnicas que usa para salir de su cuerpo y ubicar en la selva donde se encuentra actualmente su animal totémico. Todo pone a dura prueba nuestro caparazón de racionalistas europeos. Las obras de Úrsula, sin embargo, demuestran que no hay oposición entre tal psicotécnicas y lo que se podría llamar la fenotécnica de un artista video. Cada vez se trata de cambiar de perspectiva para acceder a puntos de vista otramente inaccesibles. Desde el 2008-2009, las constituciones respectivas de Ecuador y de Bolivia otorgaron a la Pachamama un estatuto de personalidad de derecho, y hoy sigue siendo defendida la Pachamama por abogados que dicen hablar en su nombre. Y en Nueva Zelanda igualmente, más recientemente, se le ha dado a un río Wanganui, el estatus de persona jurídica. Todo eso es muy positivo. Sin embargo, creo que el desafío nuevo será no tanto de alargar nuestro sistema antropocéntrico para ser más inclusivo. Ya sabemos que la inclusividad siempre fue la prerrogativa de quien ya sabe que está en el centro, sino de desplazar nuestras maneras de percibir para pensar desde otro lugar, a través de otros ojos y otros cuerpos. El arte de Ursula, como lo de muchos otros artistas en una línea semejante, nos ayudan precisamente a desprenderse de nuestras certezas.
Great, thank you both. That was lovely. And I may have misspoke that it was a professor and chair of aesthetics and philosophy of art, Professor Emmanuel Aloha. So I'd like to begin just to follow up on the remarks that you just made beautifully in Spanish. If you might just say a bit more coming from the Lienhardt anecdote, to talk about this notion of multinaturalism, and maybe a bit more specifically how a kind of socio-natural perspectivism, which you call the militant multinaturalism, can give us some clues as to an ethics or an ethics of production, not simply its aesthetic sensibility, but the ethical stakes involved in this sense of perspectivism.
Thanks a lot, and thanks first of all for having me. I'd like to say that one of the first things we become aware about, and I think Rosi Braidotti also recalled this, is the danger of romanticizing nature. And I think Ursula's work is telling us why this is a dangerous way to go. Especially in the pandemic context, we have discovered how much, or many of us that live in urban environments, or maybe even in small spaces, long for what we call nature. And this kind of conception of nature is not distinct from what we would call global capitalism. So settler colonialism was associated with the creation of national parks. Think of the United States. So nature always was this counterpart to the celebration of culture. So multiculturalism is not the solution to the problem of extractivism, but it's a different conception of what nature could be, stopping to see nature as the great outside, as the pristine world, as anything that would be homogeneous, either because it's dangerous or because it's welcoming. So I have to say that one of the things that many Amazonian anthropologists have taught us these last years is the importance of a multinaturalist understanding, which means rather than opposing something like a plurality of cultures that would look differently and in a relativist fashion on a unified real nature out there, we could find a variationist understanding of nature, of different ways of being. And here at this point, perspectivism becomes important. And I think Ursula's work is with many other artists, but hers in particular, is sensitizing us. I liked this expression a lot that Cujo used before, is making us aware what it means to perceive with a different body, to sense when your anatomy is different, when scales, temporalities, rhythms, chronologies, spaces are so different. So multinaturalism refers to perspectivism at this special point, and this is where I personally have learned a lot from the Brazilian anthropologist Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, although on some points we might have a discussion, probably it's not the time for it tonight, where he taught us that perspectivism doesn't mean that we live in a harmonious world. So the taking nature into consideration doesn't mean that nature is a space where everybody loves and hugs each other, but there is violence, there is conflict. And this also entails learning to see from the point of view of the enemy. So Viveiros de Castro's example is the point of the view of the jaguar that might be threatening me if I live in the Amazon region. So learning to see how the predator would see me becoming a prey. Right, so this also entails taking into consideration other points of view, not just as an extension of my point of view, where I would allow others to come in, just as the superior morality of Europeans now and then, and in few cases, grants, because of its generosity, some migrants to come in and maybe even allow them to be within this European space for some time, but think that maybe we have to decenter our standpoint because we are no longer at the center of the world. And I think this is what perspectivism does. It tells us that we have to view things in a different way, and maybe also avoiding the danger of ventriloquizing, of speaking in some other being's name. I would avoid the term biocentrism because I think it's also a problem. So in my last book on perspectivism, that's one of my critiques. Biocentrism means that everything is reduced to biological existence, and I don't think that's the only one. Viveros de Castro says that the Amazon Indians, indigenous people, would say everything can be a person except a tortoise. And this funny anecdote tells us that there is also an outside. Not everything is reducible to biological life or to personhood, but maybe there are also things like geological existence that we shouldn't describe in terms of biological, organological terms. Anyway, so these are a few reflections, but maybe we can come back on it later. I don't want to take too much time here. Thanks a lot. I'm giving back here to Etienne.
No, thank you so much. And we will return briefly in a few moments to this question of the geological and the non-human and the non-living as an integral element of this philosophical question. But I thought maybe to just pick up on this perspectivism and the ethical question at stake in it, I might also extend to Hélène a question about the curatorial. Hélène, you mentioned in your video the ethics of the artist, but as the person who has most recently, if I'm correct, realized the solo show of Ursula in France, and really made a lot of this work available in a museum context, where now we're seeing it in this new publication format. I'd like to invite you just to say a bit about the ethics of curating and the perspectival shifts that you maybe tried to work on in this most recent exhibition.
Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me for this fantastic project. Regarding the show and the question of ethics, in fact, through the invitation of Ursula, there was a desire to share with the large audience of the public a kind of current state of anthropological, philosophical debates about ecology, and to offer to people a view on things that are so important and that Ursula Biemann is introducing in her videos. For example, the cosmovision, indigenous knowledge, the notion of indigenous scientists, and the combination of Western academic knowledge and indigenous knowledge that she's now also developing in this beautiful project of Indigenous University. She's also dealing with the prominent question of the rights of nature that we can find in forest law, and that is, of course, developing, and that was used as a real tool by different people throughout the world, but that needs to be reinforced, of course, and strengthened. But also ecofeminist perspectives, notion of care, of reparation, interspecies communication, so many important topics of today. And I think that the tool of the exhibition is very important because it's a way to immerse people in a kind of landscape or soundscape of images, of debates, of people who are sharing their experiences, and to convey through emotional and aesthetic tools important debates of today, and to foster awareness on the urgency of life. And it was particularly interesting in this pandemic context, because during this period we were all forced to think about what is important, about our ethic, about how we deal with those ecological issues, and what we do in our daily life, but also in our professional life, to try to improve things. And I think that people were more open also to this point. And you were speaking about ethic. I try also in the curatorial approach and as director to think about a kind of sustainability in the projects, sustainability with long-term projects, with long exhibitions, with, of course, upcycling, with producing less also. So it's a way of considering the museum in every step of its missions through this approach, and not only through a curatorial approach, even if this is also very important from my point of view.
Oh, thank you. I wish I could have seen it.
It's still on view.
Okay, yeah, well, I wish I can move. But fortunately we have it here. I was very lucky to be able to present forest law as part of an exhibition cycle in Germany that I curated with Anna-Sophie Springer under the Reassembling the Natural project. And on the final day of the final iteration, forest law was presented in this quite large room, which was always full with people. And I was a bit ambitious, as it was the last afternoon of the show, and we were trying to kind of get some things arranged for the deinstall. And it was the first time I was ever scolded by a visitor in an exhibition that I had made for disturbing them, because they came out and said, "Don't you realize this is a really important film? Can you shut up and go somewhere else?" And I thought, wow, people will come and kick you out of the hallway for disturbing forest law. It was really special. But this work, watching and having the chance to see over many exhibitions of different institutions, the level of just riveted attention that people could sit with this work and be with forest law as this kind of immersive world that they were completely inside of. I think there is something quite unique to this in terms of the exhibition space itself. I don't know, Ursula, if you want to speak to this, or Belén, I know you also presented this work, but it is a difficult challenge right now. I realize, you guys put so much work into the online publication, but also seeing people in the space, the completely overwhelming sense of the relation to this video presentation, I think is quite important. And maybe Ursula, if you wanted to say anything to this, or anyone, about the difficulty of translating some of these works into this new publication format.
I don't mind, showing video in this format. People who only see this format will just get out what they can get out. But forest law has been conceived as a two-channel, a synchronized two-channel installation, which in the space is almost like you're standing in a life-size forest. With all these sounds coming your way and so on. So I think it's much more than just taking in the things people say. It is also a sensorial kind of emotional experience to be in that. And I think that's always been from the start an important intention of that piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry. I just wanted to add that in Nice with Ursula, we decided to put all together deep weather, forest law, subatlantic, acoustic ocean, but also to offer a perspective on the Vanier University. And in fact, the way to have this immersion between all those geographies, ecosystems, stories, narratives, it was a way also to intertwine those geographies and to also embody in one way the global interactions in which we evolve. It were not geographies separated, but things dialoguing all together. And I think it makes sense also in the space and helps understanding all those connections.
No, I think it's also somehow, you know, the affordance of the exhibition space, of course, in its immersive quality is something we all miss, especially after 14 months. But also the ability to read and engage the work and review the clip and all of these other elements, of course, have a whole other series of affordances that I think we're learning to experience and learn from differently. I would like to jump into the next clip because it carries on some of the questions that Emmanuel initiated, as well as from this question of the ethics. And I think it's quite important try to bring in a few more perspectives on this, and then we can really open it up, and I'll try to pass along into the discussion some questions from the audience, as well as a few more to all of our guests. I'll just remind everyone, if you're watching this on the website, you can put questions in underneath the video screen. Also, several of you have already asked about what is the university that you are talking about. And you'll have to wait for the last segment to hear more about this. Emmanuel and Alain both teased it well, but please stay with us to the end to hear more about this. And I will have my colleagues and comrades in Dirección, if you can get clip 4 ready to roll. I will just introduce Professor of Franz Boas, Professor of Anthropology, Elizabeth Povinelli, and Professor of Anthropology at McGill University, Eduardo Cohen, who will bring us our next engagement. Well, thanks for staying with us. Please put your questions underneath the video, and we'll see you in a moment.
We live in different tenses, not different times. We live the differential intensities of how different events are placed in relation to our narration of them. As we move across Norwegian shorelines, Amazonian rivers, and dense jungle spaces, Caribbean coastlines, or alpine heights, we move across different social tenses and the way in which they intensify or diminish the effects of climate collapse and disastrous environmental transformations. We live in a coming catastrophe. We live in an ancestral catastrophe. In his tremendous Tanner lectures, Dipesh Chakrabarty attempted to outline the epical consciousness in which all humans now differentially share. A shared world, a world shared with differential stakes, differential effects, differential powers. His understanding of the current epical consciousness rests on the collapse of 3 orders of time: geological time, species time, and human time. For a long time, so the story goes, these 3 forms of time, geology, Darwinian speciation, and historical historiography, could be kept at a disciplinary distance. the humanists didn't have to worry about speciation. Evolutionary biology could begin when non-life ceased being the only mode of existence. And geological time, for a long time, need not take human existence into its accounting of the sedimentary nature of the geological strata. For Chakrabarty, the nausea of the moment comes from the collapse of these three temporal orders, creating an anxious present. But of course, Chakrabarty is speaking about those for whom a geontological imaginary was about the truth of existence, not about the governance of it. For those who watched the European sailing boats waft onto their shores, the separations of existence, subtending geological time, speciation time, and human time, geos, zoe, bios, was never their drama. And thus, the collapse of geos, zoe, bios creates no nausea, creates no temporal vortex in which the current way in which they move is radically altered. Geontopower arrived on those boats. The separation of non-life and life and the ordering of living things based on what Europeans saw them as more or less internally potentiated, based on their own accounts of their own superiority, was a form of aeronomadism, to paraphrase Edouard Glissant. In granting political representation and ethical weight only to those who, like themselves, who were no one because Europeans thought themselves world historic, in granting political representational and ethical weight to no one, Europeans created a radical difference between the mineral and the biological, and within the biological, a radical hierarchy in which white humans sat atop all others. And this allowed them to justify and legitimate the displacement, the alienation, the destruction, the dispersions of all existence until existence itself turned its back on them. Thus we see now the affluent looking over the horizon, at storms coming over the lands, over mountains, over seas. Look at plastics and other toxic wastes washing onto their shores, are shocked that they have already arrived when they weren't looking. For them, the event of climate and environmental catastrophe is narrated as present or coming. The social tense is a fury of how could this be happening to us? I should not have to care about the earth and its more than human existence, about geology, about speciation. For others, the ancestral catastrophe is the very separations of time that are causing this epical nausea for those privileged few, that legitimated the great extraction and consumption machinery of liberalism and now illiberal capitalism. The ancestral catastrophe is the poisonous terraforming of the earth against which they struggle to maintain their relations to their ongoing kin in the more than human world. Many from these affluent places are coming and asking, you've been living this for years. Tell us how we can survive. One wonders how to answer.
Buenos días, Úrsula. Te saludo desde Montreal, la ciudad en donde nos conocimos, aunque realmente nuestra relación ha comenzado mucho antes en la Amazonía, por medio del amor que tenemos los dos para ese lugar, sus bosques, su gente, las personas que viven ahí, personas que son humanas y no humanas también, y las amenazas, la preocupación por las amenazas y la esperanza de las posibilidades que también tiene ese lugar. Tú eres artista y piensas por medio del video. El video para mí es un método muy apropiado para pensar con los bosques, porque el video piensa como los bosques, es decir, por medio de la imagen. De hecho, todos pensamos por medio de la imagen cuando soñamos. En cierto sentido, pensamos con los bosques cada noche y también hacemos cine cada noche. Has hablado del artista como un receptor, una persona que puede abrirse a ese gran juego de imágenes, sentir lo que nos dice ese mundo psíquico mucho más grande que nosotros y transmitir este mensaje para los demás. Esto para mí es el trabajo del artista y tú lo has hecho de una forma muy especial. Obviamente, no es simplemente abrirse, sino de entrar en ese juego, esa danza que implica hacer arte. Hacer arte es encontrar el camino, buscar, entender, de trabajar con esas fuerzas y plasmarlo eso en algo real, como una universidad, como una obra, como algo que tendrá un efecto en el futuro. Y eso realmente es lo que haces tú, y es por eso que tu trabajo es un trabajo ético, es un trabajo que nos muestra un camino, muestra la manera de sintonizarnos, nos equipa, nos da las herramientas para poder pensar mejor con los bosques pensantes que nos piensan. Gracias.
Great. Thank you to Professors Povinelli and Cohn. If you're out there, that was lovely. We'll follow up with you later. I wanted to pick up on the remark from the beginning of Beth's talks that we live in different tenses, not different times. I think her whole introduction of the geo onto power and the question of thinking these different tenses as well as different times. I wanted to ask Kojo, thinking of some of the both exhibitions and video works, Medium Earth, Who Does the Earth Think It Is? And of course, more recently, Infinity Minus Infinity. In all of these works, at least as I've learned from them, the Autoth group seems to also use a kind of interscalar vehicle to, again, borrow this term from Gabriel Hecht, to explore and also to articulate these different tenses. And I was wondering if you could maybe just say a little bit more about this question of the interface between the tense and the time.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I'll try to connect up some of what Elizabeth Pominelli said to some moments in Ursula's work, specifically that moment at the end of Acoustic Ocean, where she credits 15 different marine forms of life, that specific moment. So for me, Elizabeth Povinelli's intervention is a profound one, because in asking us to think through the grammar of time and to be attentive to that grammar, she offers a really precise reading of her fundamental rethinking of, these the terms of biopower and necropower, biopolitics and necropolitics, which have really shaped contemporary thought. And her argument that preceding and subtending that fundamental distinction between life and death is an even more fundamental distinction between life and non-life, between bios and geos, and that fundamental distinction between life and non-life is the fundamental colonial hierarchy that allows a coloniality of geology, which then prepares the ground for colonial extractivism and the extractivist zones, which continue to this day more than ever, and simultaneously prepare the ground for the enslavement of peoples as property, and also allows for the genocide of those peoples put to work as enslaved peoples. So that this geo onto power, which for her is a way of describing what she calls late liberalism, is also nothing new. It's, on the contrary, it's modernity as understood from the perspective of those who've been subject to that hierarchy. And so to think the relation between life and non-life in terms of the tense is to ask Sun Ra's question, which is to say, it's after the end of the world already. It's after the end of the world. Don't you know that yet? So part of what Povinelli is doing, like other thinkers such as Catherine Youssef, is to reverse the direction of the coming catastrophe and to speak to compounded catastrophes, which build up over time and which constitute a present, which is not, it's not so much that the present comes after the past, it's more that the past compounds and accumulates as the present. And so that moment in Acoustic Ocean in which the scientist starts to speak, her immediate words are to say, "We have always known this." She immediately draws out a durational perspective. She immediately points to the relation between the seasons, the weather, the forms of life of reindeers, and the relations between peoples, reindeers, seasons, times, and tenses. So she immediately changes the tense of the crisis. And that's part of the power of that moment in Acoustic Ocean. And then there is that moment right in the closing credits, when Ursula's credits, when Ursula effectively thanks the 15 different orders of marine life, who we've heard throughout, but we didn't know it. And to me, that is a profound dimension in Ursula's project. There is a dimension of méconnaissance, a dimension of not knowing. We didn't know we were listening to those 15 voices. A, because we don't know the voices of all of these creatures, all of these submarine creatures. And B, if we did, we couldn't translate them either. So it was this profound moment in which the entire work just changed. It just turned on its axis, and would oblige you to go back and re-listen again, so that moments that you heard as a so-called soundtrack were actually moments of communication, moments of acoustic signaling, moments of acoustic environmental choreography. There's a moment in Acoustic Ocean where the text talks about the whales who surface and who sing a canto of impermanence and then submerge again. And at this moment, you know, one's first instinct would be to say, oh, if only I could understand the song of the whales. But it's a more profound relation to understand your recursive limits to what you don't understand. You know, not to try to take a shortcut to understanding, but to actually have some modesty about what you don't know and maybe you cannot know, and actually recursively factor that back into what it is you've just watched. So yeah, maybe I'll stop there, because otherwise I'll just keep going.
Oh, that's great, and I think that recursive effect occurs in many places. But I also would like to return to the question of, maybe to borrow this phrase from Ian Balcom in Inspectors of the Atlantic, that time doesn't pass, but it accumulates. And there is a way in which learning to navigate in this accumulatory time of the catastrophe behind us requires different forms of navigation, different indices and directionalities. When we bear in mind that the word disaster is to be without a star to follow, how do we reorient ourselves in a cosmos if the catastrophe is behind us? Sorry, I can hear a gasp, but I can't see the video.
It was me again.
Okay. Please go ahead.
But maybe someone else should talk, otherwise I just feel like I'm just going on and on.
No, it's very, very interesting, Kojo.
Okay, I'll say one more thing then. I think it has to do with the fact that every time you embark on a project, there is already, and there is a very specific stake. There is a very specific crisis that is playing out on the sky, in the sea, and in the ground. The aquanaut in Acoustic Ocean, she says history happens in the atmosphere, not on the ground. So there is a crisis on the ground, but the ground cannot be understood outside of the meteorological cycle, which entails both the ocean currents and movements in the sky. And I feel there is always an extreme specificity at stake about where the starting point from a project is. So it's never a question of going straight to the global or going straight to the planetary. No, there is always a real stake with a real dilemma, a dilemma which is both present and imminent, and also and simultaneously accumulative and compounded. But there it is. There is a scene. There is a frame. The camera takes its position. The camera often frames like a kind of I think of you as a kind of reversed Patrick Keeler, in the way Patrick Keeler's films always start with a locked camera which he holds. Patrick Keeler's always on the ground, whereas you start on the ground, but then things move because the effort is to connect the position that a camera takes the distance it takes, and then move both above and below into the sky and above the ocean. And maybe that's why that scene in Subatlantic, where the Arctic Sea is seen through the sky, that moment where sky and ice and ocean meet. This is why this is a powerful figure for thinking with video in the way Eduardo Cohn pointed out. Because in this moment, there is this combinatory image in which the horizon is not abolished, but it is opened to its reverse. The sky, the sea, the ice, they all converge in this videographic illusion, which is not an illusion, but which is in fact a record. And this is part of what I call the climate of fiction. Dipesh Chakrabarty talks a lot about the climate of history. We don't talk enough about the climate of fiction, or the climate of documentary, or the climate of the post-cinematic, like how it is artists find ways to assemble a climate of vision and a climate of sound. I'll stop there.
That's a perfect place to, if I may, lead into this last clip where our two comrades who send their regards to everyone to wish they could be here, but they give us a great way to, again, ground or instantiate a position from which to then return to this question of both a figuration and a climate of fiction. So if Dirección could prepare the fifth clip, I'll just briefly introduce Paulo Tavares, who is a collaborator on forest law with Ursula Biemann, and Professor Marisol de la Cadena, whose work has inspired us all. And I'll roll that clip, and we'll be back to take up this question of the instantiated figure, the climate of fiction, and the becoming of the university. Thanks for staying with us. Please put your questions in the chat. If we can get a few of them in the next round, I'll do my very best.
Hello, I would like to congratulate Ursula Biemann for the launching of Becoming Earth, this incredible work summarizing her projects on art and ecology. And it's really beautiful to see all of them together in this beautiful monograph, digital monograph. I had the pleasure and the opportunity of working with Ursula in a project titled Forest Law, which is part of this monograph. And it's really incredible and great to see how some of the questions we were discussing back then have exploded, unfolded in this collection of videos and thoughts and ideas, pushing the boundaries between art and ecology. Congratulations, Ursula, and congratulations, Etienne, for the amazing work in editing this monograph.
I have chosen to talk to you about Ursula's work through the film she made with Paulo Tavares, Forest Law, Selva Jurídica, for two reasons. First, of all the places in the world that Ursula's work portrays, this one takes place in the Amazon, a place I feel close to. And second, because Selva Jurídica may illustrate the practice of a pluriversal alliance across what Isabel Stengers names as interests in common that are not the same interest. Isabel Stengers uses this phrase to talk about alliances among European farmers and urban activists. Confronting GMOs was their interest in common. And they were also motivated by different interests: the price of seeds, the farmers, and the quality of food, the urban activists. I have used Stenger's phrase to talk about alliances around interests in common across onto epistemic divergent ecologies of practice. My proverbial example is the defense of Ausangate in Cusco, Peru, against a mining corporation by a coalition of environmentalists and indigenous peasants. Ausangate is a complex entity. It is a mountain, and not only such, it is also an earth being. In the alliance, urban activists defended the mountain. Indigenous peasants defended the earth being. Their ontologically divergent interests converged in a common interest: their opposition to the conversion of the complex space that Ausangate occupies into an open pit mine. Back to forest law now. Many themes compose it, but central among them were the deliberations over saving a part of the Amazonian rainforest that coincided with what was known as Territorio Sarayaku in Spanish, Sarayaco territory in English, and named in Quechua as Causa y Sacha. These last two words translate into English as living forest. I would like to slow down this translation. Yes, the language of origin, Amazonian Quechua, should inflect the languages of destiny, English and Spanish, as Walter Benjamin has recommended. But I also want to suggest that the possibility of an understanding that may emerge at the contact zone where all three languages overlap, even if only one is spoken. Spanish, for example. This condition is not infrequent when indigenous spokespersons are invited to speak in official settings or required to speak in official settings, national or international courts, for example. These are sites of partial connections among worlding practices, and the words and grammars that speak them make pluriversal contact zones at the sites of their utterance. If we listen there, at that contact zone, we may feel another grammar within our own usual grammar, one that is recalcitrant to the divisions between nature and humans. Yes, we know that, but also between object and subject, owned and owner, that make possible the capitalocenic practices that currently devastate the planet. With this in mind, I want us to listen to Jose Walinga's word. He is a Sarayaku spokesperson. In the film, he talks about the explosives that the oil prospecting corporation buried within what appeared at the court as the territory of the Sarayaku people. I have emphasized this division because this division is what I think Walinga's words undo. Listen to him. The state, and this is him talking, the state tried to minimize the presence of the explosives on Sarayaku territory. It indicated that an explosive is dangerous when it's attached to a human body. That is classification A. Classification B is when an explosive is left in a building. In that case, you can evacuate the people from the building. Classification C is when explosives are somewhere far away. The state said that the presence of explosives in Sarayaku territory falls into category C because they're far from the main dwelling place of Sarayaku people. And therefore, they don't represent a threat, and there's no need to remove them. But for us, continues Walinga, their presence represents category A, and that is what we told the state, that the explosives are attached to the body of the Sarayaku. And that's what I wanted us to read. The attachment of explosives to the body of the Sarayaku, even if they are remote. I propose that these words, which were spoken in Spanish, are inextricable from a Quechua understanding that refuses the separations between territory and people. Sarayaku territory is a space that can be mapped into three-dimensional coordinates. Yes, it can be mapped, Euclidean space, and it's not only such space. It is also an entanglement of persons, not only human persons, in inherently related dwelling practices that compose causa y sacha, the Quechua naming of living forest, that Sarayaku also is. Territory indivisible from persons and vice versa. Persons indivisible from territory. I also want to propose that if we listen carefully with an ear towards what exceeds the legal grammar of the state, we may hear that the judiciary deliberations to save the section of the Amazon named Sarayaku enacted a pluriversal event where Amazonian nature was present in the court as a biological organism and not only such. Present in the courts was also Sarayaku as living forest, an entanglement of persons that does not add up because while individually identifiable, they are also inseparable. Causa y Sacha, the Ecuadorian Amazon rainforest, nature, and not only. With this, I propose that Selva Jurídica, forest law, the film, is a site of partial connections, a pluriversal contact zone where ontic divergences, their incommensurabilities enabled rather than precluded the expression of an interest in common, saving the Amazon rainforest or parts of it that was not only the same interest. It was also Sarayaku territory, Causa y Sacha, a forest of entangled living persons, human and not, that needed to be saved.
Amazing. And again, thank you to both Paulo and Marisol, who could not be with us this evening, but send regards many times. I think in this last clip, especially with this question of interests in common that are not in common, interests in common that do not share ontologies, or interests in common that are, in fact, kaleidoscopically related to one another. What we begin to understand is that the politics of coalition making is going to have to look very differently maybe than we assumed in previous decades. Similarly, connections from earlier feminist theory, from a standpoint of epistemology and early feminist works, have really flourished into a question of what we might call a kind of multiplicity of ecologies that retain certain concerns, perspectivists say concerns, but that really open up the possibility of convergent coalitions around interests that are both common and not common. I feel like this is a really excellent way to open up the question of the university. We've received a number of questions about this project. Belen, you mentioned there is an ongoing project with Ursula. So I'd invite you both, if you would, to just share a little bit about this ongoing, current, unfolding project. And I would just like to remind the audience, in addition to the questions, if you have some other than the university, also throughout the publication itself, you can also find both Belen's curatorial text and Ursula's opening artist text if you'd like to read more about the overall conception. But perhaps before we give away the university, we can slide one more question in with Professor Bradotti around this question of the envisioning of a new coalition and new ideas of convergence. Where does, coming from your work in particular, the post-human enable us to reorient our attention to coalitions beyond the human?
Thank you, Etienne. Hello, Ursula. Hello, everybody. Sorry I was a bit late. I'm at another big conference. It's a very busy day. Amazing event. I don't want to repeat what I said in the video, but very nice to be here. Complex question, Etienne, but typical of you to add some complexity to what is already not easy. The politics of coalitions, of course, been the dream of the shall we call it the non-parliamentarily left since the 1970s, to be able to assemble and connect across. I think is more urgent than ever, but the heterogeneity of the different agents of this coalition makes it something that we really need to work on. I think you mentioned the need to revision standpoint theory, that connects to the question of perspectivism. We are all situated and located, but our locations differ so very much, not only in terms of power, the classical sociological categories, and of course ontologically between human, non-humans, and then different variations of sexualized, racialized otherness, but also very much in worldviews. I think that the perspectivism for me and the politics that could emerge from it is really worldviews, it's values, it's what would you even want an alliance for? What is the milieu, the middle ground on which we could posit this alliance, and what are the values that we're trying to sponsor? I was thinking back of the work of Ishun on Afrofuturism, and that almost desperate but incredibly affirmative gesture of transforming a deficit into a plus, a history of negativity into affirmative futures. You have to be a bit crazy to even think of that. And yet it's out of that determination to just break with the negativity of a past that prevents us from creating a sustainable present, let alone possible futures, that is what binds us. So I see the alliance as very much, I think Beth is totally right, as temporal as well as spatial. And for me, Ursula is the great artist of space and geos, of course, I said it in my video already, but temporalities, to be somehow, somewhere in love with possible futures. And when times get really, really tough, particularly for people not used to hardship, which takes pretty much all of Europe in one slot, dreaming, even imagining a possible futures is something that we don't have the spiritual and the cognitive power for. So I think maybe accepting the hard labor involved in creating visions for the future, being a little bit in love with the times to come, not in a messianic mode, but in a much more labor-intensive forging of coalition ones. It's asking a lot of people. People are exhausted, but we do have amazing precedents of resilience, of projective perspectivism in the Indian, in the indigenous, different non-Western worldviews, and not in any appropriative mode, but with humility and with an openness of mind and heart. Lot of work. I hope that we can find the meeting grounds, the middle, le milieu, the middle ones. And I think artistic praxis, dear Ursula, helps us get in there. So difficult question, Etienne, at the end of a long day, but I still think we can do it.
But as you say at the end of your video that we began with, there's a lot of work to be done. We're not short of things to take care of. But I think coming back to this question,
the exhaustion of the people around us is extraordinary, at least in my part of the world. The exhaustion, the absolute impoverishment of the soul and of the mind, a great difficulty to get, even the desire for connection, let alone the ability to sustain them. it's almost an emergency at that level. And I find it among my students really, really worrisome. Like, I feel I have to give them spiritual vitamins in the mode of music and literature, a lot of music, a lot of art to keep them going. So it's 101, I think, learning to survive, learning from the South. It's time to learn, I think.
I think that spiritual vitamins is a good thing that maybe we all can supplement a little bit more with. But the other elements, I think that, you know, thinking with everyone who has joined us, but specifically turning to this new project, which is an extraordinary amount of work and commitment in a time of exhaustion. But one thing in the conversations preparing for this event, which I found to be incredibly inspiring and also strategically informative, was coming to understand how the university, which I'll pass now to Ursula to give us an introduction, is understood as a multi-stable institution, creation, initiative, project, defense mechanism, and that the multi-stability of these strategies may give us some key in how to enable institutions that maybe are less siloed than those that we've inherited. So
yeah, it's a difficult one, Etienne, because as you know, the university is under attack. I think today from the UK, we heard that they've just cut down all the subsidy, well, 50% of the subsidy for arts education, because they always hit art education first. They're considering it a privilege for the rich and not an entitlement for everybody. So it's so much under attack that I find myself having to defend it as an institution that has a century-old history of democratic criticism. I mean, universities are older than nation states in Europe. So I treasure them with all of the complicated history and role in colonialism and all of that. But nonetheless, it's an interesting singular institution. But it is absolutely the case that in cognitive capitalism, the production of knowledge escapes the university. It's distributed. I'm working with Sarah Nuttall on the notion of a distributed university, coinciding with corporate interests, R&D, the fact that the exploration of Mars on Mars is actually a private enterprise funded by Elon Musk, who runs the equivalent of a campus in terms of what he's doing to do the sort of the up and down trips to the moon. The activist world, the artist world, there's such multiplicity of sites of production of knowledge that the university has a great difficulty keeping up. So I think the debate on what it should be is one of the great issues of today. And it's a pretty split, I think across Europe, it's pretty split left and right, with the right wanted the university to turn into a lifelong coaching mechanism. And what's left of the left wanting it as a place of critical theory, pretty classical, democratic criticism, Edward Said type of thing. It looks like the left is losing by the minute. And that's all the more a reason for trying to reinvent a model. I like the distributed university idea of Sarah Nuttall's because it does make sense for the world that we're in, and then have the university as an old archive. Just a database, a massive database of knowledge. But the essence of the work, which is the work of constructive coalitions to compare notes on knowledge production and temporalities of survival, that will have to be done in other places, in other locations, in between. But I would not, I just love the institution for what it has meant in terms of resistance as well, in terms of collaboration with systems of power. It has created some of the best and some of the worst. But it is an old kind of pillar of Western democracies and of Western powers at the same time. I don't like it when the right, when the right goes to power, the first thing they do is they shut down the university, they change the curriculum, particularly the history curriculum. And that's happening in Eastern Europe right now. So it's a complicated story. It's a yes, but to be reinvented. And I think in a distributed manner with heterogeneous elements and massive elements of technology, amounts of technology, quite obviously. Non-human knowledge would be very present also through computation and machine learning and smart algorithms that can think faster, if not better. If speed is better, I'm not sure, but they certainly beat us in thinking powers. Exciting times, but I would still fight for some sort of mixed heterogeneous university complex.
I think I would count myself among those who agree that we're as whatever flaws they have, we're better keeping them than eliminating them. But I would be curious, Ursula, maybe, and Belen, if you would say about, obviously this is a huge project and you've taken, an extraordinary role in it, but the decision to use the form, even the semantic form of the university, maybe you could just say a bit what it is, how people can follow it, and also, it is to say the form of the university is going to be put to work here to do both some conceptual, semantic, political work, and maybe you could just say a bit about that as we close.
Well, I will leave some time to Belen because I think she understands things from a different point of view and from a broader point of view and longer historical perspective than myself, because I was introduced to this project a bit through her, through meeting the Inga indigenous people of Colombia, on a field trip where I was still thinking that I would produce a film. But during this trip, Hernando Chindoy, the leader of the Inga, then asked me to collaborate on or helping them actually create a university, an indigenous university. And I immediately thought this was a super interesting idea. Because I've been interested in different epistemic systems, and this could be an opportunity of starting to negotiate this between Western thought and indigenous cosmology, and basically it is an indigenous-led initiative. So I kind of follow what they have in mind, and they have already a lot of clear ideas of what that university could become. It is always also a political project, of course, of occupying the territory through a different form of epistemic occupation of that territory that has been pretty much a bit infested by all these missionary schools that appeared there in the early century. And so it operates on many different levels, My task consisted a bit in trying to see if I can get partnerships with universities like ETH in Zurich to get the architecture side going, and also start establishing partnership with Colombian universities where some individuals, we are always speaking about individuals, in fact, who were suddenly getting excited, committed, who have a long experience with indigenous communities in Colombia and elsewhere. So by now we have a fantastic team together, and we are kind of working in intercultural teams, with a bunch of Inga who have been thinking about getting a university in their own conception for the last 10, 12 years. So it's by no means an idea that I had planted there, but I think this, to make these differential knowledge systems productive for bringing forth maybe new ways of doing things, always connected to the territory and in dialogue with all these other beings that roam the forests there. So it's a way of putting some of these ideas, these interspecies ideas, in these non-human ideas, to put those into practice. What would it actually mean to be making knowledge together with these other beings. You know, we always speak about it in theory, but what does it actually mean if you try to do that? How would our way of research, our research methodologies have to change in order to accommodate this larger community? With, you know, I mean, these are some of the things we are discussing kind of on a daily basis. So it took me about 1.5 or 2 years to find my way as an artist in this, because I was so busy creating alliances and so on. And I see myself by now as a kind of an aesthetic companion to the project that gives in conceptual and aesthetic impulses, but is also, I don't know, keep producing aesthetic stuff that where I feel I have something to offer, right? Where I have some experience to bring into the whole, as kind of creating video archives with interviews with the elders. We are so afraid that all this knowledge is going to be lost because they're getting older. These could become, you know, materials for teaching. Video is a great medium to produce knowledge in societies that are not particularly based in text, you know. And so I think that I have a lot to figure out in that respect as well. Yeah, so the project will have a big web platform where all these thoughts and materials will be gathered. It's called Devenir Universidad, and it's also associated now with the partners, with my partners with whom I co-create all this, you know. So it's not, it's, as Paolo said, you're making a big step from bringing ecology in the arts. Now you're bringing art into the ecology, and it's really quite a big step for me to start acting in the real world. But I think that's the only way we can start really forming this future that we're supposed to be enamored with and excited about. And I think it's so very necessary to work on co-creating this new world we want, and not just critiquing the one we don't want, because you know, I mean, this is what comes up in conversations with academics and theorists a lot. They always have a lot of beautiful post-colonial tools of critique, but they have never gone out in the field and done anything like that. And of course, it's messy in the field, it's complicated. Nothing is as simple as we can think on a page in a book, you know. So I'm excited. I feel very alive. I feel I have a long-term perspective, because it's taking maybe 3, 5, 10 years until we all kind of have this place running the way we think. And yeah, you'll find me there in the next few years for sure.
Ursula, does UNESCO work, or do you want to work with them, with the UNESCO idea of a more decentered type of university? That was one question. And I remark at the very origin of the European university system, what made it a universum is the fact that people walked from one university to the other. It was a nomadic start. There was only men, of course, allowed. But at the very, very beginning, people would literally go from Bologna to Paris, to Coimbra, to Oxford, and it would be part of how it was a pilgrimage type of model, that you would visit the other people's territory and learn as you go. And we've kind of forgotten that's really how it began, with visiting, pilgrimages, thinking with your feet, men only. Okay, nobody's perfect, but it was very much, they created a unity through that movement, through that physical engagement. And it was very much connected to the pilgrimage routes. And when we started the Erasmus programs, we went back to that, get the people moving, visiting each other. So you create a unity through diversity, literally with your feet. And I find that going back to that may be a very, very good way to consolidate friendship.
I didn't know that history and how you connect it now, but the concept the Inga have of their university, because there are people who have been dispersed through so many different processes, colonial conflict, etc. They are located quite far apart, and the university is going to be a way of connecting them. It's really not like a center, like a city campus. It's going to be a completely decentralized. There will be river learning and language learning and all kind of plant learning and medicinal learning. It's all in different locations, and it's connected to paths in a way. And it's those paths that actually spatialize the university, and it's where you generate knowledge, in fact.
Western philosophy was born walking around the agora. We only ever think with our feet. It's one of my basic rules, really.
Yeah, very good. So we're not so not so distinct after all, no? No.
It's interesting how the movement and the connection and seeking for others and connecting to the territory. I mean, our universities, Coimbra is 700 years old, Bologna is now 900 years old. They're really ancient institutions. And if you look at the origins, it's extraordinary, this quest for this reaching out, this I'm coming to visit to check out how you do this. Of course, this is a long time ago, but those origins, I think, tell a story. And I think it's one that we need to go back to. Almost, this territorialization of the knowledge production exercise, the visiting, the pilgrimage. I'm fascinated by that because, as I said, fighting for the university may be our last losing battle of the many we've had in our existence.
Yeah, but maybe we are also part of that generation who went out to travel as a form of generating knowledge and wisdom and maturity and so on. You acquired all these qualities through traveling. And I think that's not necessarily the case for every generation that came or even right now. It's just not, it's not part of a life perspective anymore.
Maria Belén, can I ask you to add a bit on the university?
No sabemos ninguno qué estamos haciendo, ¿no? Es una especie de organismo aleatorio que está ocurriendo, ¿no? Todo es como una conexión afectiva.
This is kind of a care-based
pero es muy extraño.
Network. It's very strange how
no hay unas identidades fijas.
There aren't established entities, or remember, not necessarily you have your clarity, but the indigenous people have clarity of what they want, or that they are representing a different way of educating. The majority, they want to be legitimized to be a part of a society, but on the other hand, looking at the context, Ursula shares this very complex understanding to develop among everyone. And so we see that the center of everything is it's the forest, it's the jungle. And so strange. And so, bringing, science to participate, the sciences that's also centered in its place relationship with biotics or mineral entities, but understanding these other cosmologies is very complex. It's very difficult because they are weakened due to so much war, attacks, and the jungle itself has been reduced. And so this is a vital association where we see an affirmation of life and this passion to move forward and this resistance that's focused on what is positive and creative, but even more so, it's fundamentally carried out by intuition. The intuition that Ursula has with the connection with this Inga people, where they have recovered their contact with Yahe, the Wayaska, what they call the medicine. And so Ursula is also working on a piece that's being carried out in similar to how to make this visible, that's returned to her sensitivity. And these plants are codes for a temporal immaterial memory, and they connect us to this interconnected mega structure that it's very shocking or surprising for us. And so these tenses, these times, when I was reflecting on the time and accumulation, there's a human time, the human history. So Walter Benjamin, it was called the Messianic time in times of violence. But when you go into this intelligence, you see these overlapping times in different stratums. And so these ways of learning about, of being in contact with vegetation and the jungle can allow to have connections with science, as Ursula mentions, with our science at least. And this can be a place that's not necessarily institution to teach or to carry investigation, but more to resist or to try to imagine an ethics that allows us to see how we can relate with this multi-dimensionality that's so complex and so strange, and it's there and will continue. Because we have maybe limited capacities as a human society, but we focus in other visions. And we see this in maybe hallucinating communication, this shamanic communication, which is maybe the foundation of this resistance. This has allowed us to, or has allowed these indigenous communities to overcome so much genocide and barbarity, this possibility to extrapolate their physical reality and these hallucinating, shocking life experiences. So we don't know necessarily what will happen in the future, but we do know we are well accompanied. I think Ursula is one of the artists who has maybe the most complex and strange artist, because she's a manager, she's a philosopher, she's a politician, she's caring, she's generous, she has the possibility of being aesthetic, and in the same way Ursula also has these associations that are very, very lucky, because nothing is necessarily planned or there's written down in a formal way. It's more of, this through the energy, it's creating something that can lead to, well, we're not sure what. This is something that's very strange. So this university, it's a place of resistance. It's a place that is, we're not sure what will happen, how it will take form, but we do have the clarity that some concepts in philosophy and life work and some resistance of some people, the presence of the medicine, of the spirit. And so we'll see if these, very, very different forms will all fit in a relationship that maybe is more formal, such as a university setting.
Don't worry too much, Belen. I'll bring some form into this.
Well, that's great. I'm sure people will want to follow this project. I know, having heard both of you speak about this over the past months working together, it's incredibly exciting, and I hope people who can find their way to it from the current publication, will put the link in there. But I also just want to say that we wanted to draw some attention to the university project. It's unfolding, but I also don't want people to forget that there is a whole publication platform that we have just launched with this decade of beautiful work from Ursula, as well as her writing, Marie Belén's writing, the conversations that a number of the philosophers have contributed in a variety of other materials that you can share, please, with colleagues, with comrades, with friends, screen it together, screen it alone, but please do enjoy. In thinking about the relationship between both theory and video, I was reminded in both Belén and Ursula's remarks that in his recent film, Raoul Peck quotes Sven Lindqvist to say that it's not knowledge that we lack, but what is missing is the courage to understand what we know and draw conclusions. And I think Ursula's work gives us both courage and capacity to begin to both draw those conclusions, understand what we know, as well as to extend our capacity to act. So on behalf of Ursula and Belén, I want to thank all of our guests, as well as the production team, the technical team, the translation, the university support, El Altilo Studio for the design, as well as Mariana Hoyos, the designers for the videos, and everyone who made this event possible. And of course, a very special thank you to Belén for bringing us through her curatorial vision together this evening, and for Ursula for sharing all of this work with us, both in many venues and events over the past years and here in this publication that's now available for you to share. Thank you for everyone who tuned in today or tonight, and please do share this work as it's very important that it gets out now that we've launched it into the world. We hope to see you all again soon, whether in the Zoom, in the museum, or in the streets. Have a very good night. And please, if you'd like to share the event, it will be posted as a recording in a few days. So if folks missed it, you can share it with them then. Thank you again. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Etienne.